I've always been a fan of open world games. Their sheer scale and exploration present in them is amazing, and a testament of what a massive AAA studio can create. But sometimes a giant open world is just too giant. Recently, I've been playing through the GTA 5 story mode, and I've gotta say it's a lot of fun. I also understand why I wasn't allowed to play this as a child. But anyways, while the world is large, a lot of it feels like unused real estate. Of course, that is to be expected. To make the world feel like an actual American state, it should be large. But I can't help but think back to other games that use a much smaller world much more efficiently. Let's travel back to 1998, the year The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time was released. At the time, it featured the biggest open world gamers had ever seen, with Hyrule Field. Looking back on it now, it's fair to say it feels smaller than it felt on first playthrough. But that's just it. How is it a world as small as Ocarina's managed to feel larger than it really was? It has more to do with just being the first of its kind. It's about careful pacing and story structure. The game doesn't just drop the player into the thick of it from the beginning, like with older Zelda games. Instead, you start in Link's much smaller home village, Kokiri Forest. Only after going through the game's prologue does the game open up and let the player out into the much larger and more open Hyrule Field, expanding the player's idea of the world. But what about the efficiency I mentioned? Well, the game has one more trick up its sleeve. After completing some dungeons and collecting the needed items to progress, Link is tasked with pulling the Master Sword from its pedestal. Doing so causes Link to go into a sort of hibernation and emerge into the future as an adult. The world that the player knew while playing as child Link has changed. Areas explored in the past now house new experiences, as well as whole new areas becoming available, once again changing the player's perception of the world. To this day, you'd be hard-pressed to find another game with a world used as effectively as Ocarina's. I can think of one, or maybe two. Fast forwarding 22 years to the release of Nier Replicant, a game directed by the eccentric Yoko Taro. While not very popular at the time of its release, it would be, after the release of its sequel, Nier Automata, 7 years later. These games not only take inspiration from the world design philosophy of Ocarina of Time, but they outright copy it to great success. And you don't have to take my word for it, because Yoko Taro confirmed it at a game developer conference, as I found in a game developer news site article by Alex Waro. At the conference, he explains the similarities all the games share, saying it would be incorrect to label either of his games as open worlds because of the fact he basically ripped off Ocarina of Time. Quote, since Nier copied that, it actually has very little freedom when compared to open world games we have now. End quote. On top of that, first Nier and Ocarina also share a very similar story structure, in that the player starts as a child and later becomes an adult. Part of the Nier games that tend to catch players off guard is the fact that to see everything the game has to offer, the player must go through parts of the game multiple times so that they can see it from a new perspective, be it as an adult and replicant or a different character in Automata, but of course in the same world. Which is the case of the original Nier. Yoko Taro admits it only occurred because they didn't have the budget for a larger map. It's truly a case of limitations leading to innovation. All of this comes from Yoko Taro's interesting philosophy of providing players with true freedom in their games. He knows something he calls open world fatigue, where gamers are worn out by bigger games with mindless fetch jobs and empty side quests. Quote, how do we get to the point where players complain about having a high level of freedom, even though a high level of freedom is what they were supposed to be expecting? I think it's fair to say that a state of high level of freedom does not equate to the actual sensation of feeling free, and that is very unique to games. End quote. Taro then says that freedom is a feature the player did not have in the past. Quote, what I'm trying to say here is to make players feel a sense of freedom, what's important is not volume. Freedom is felt the moment that the perceptions held by the human mind are expanded. End quote. This is the same idea we saw used in Ocarina of Time. However, Yoko Taro did not get this idea from Ocarina of Time. Instead, he found inspiration from the Super Mario Bros. Warp zones. Quote, I was able to move my character all the way to the top of the map, and from there I was able to warp. The place where the score was a hidden secret. I was absolutely shocked. What was going on here? Seeing that smashed my entire idea of how the world was framed, and made me think this game contained an enormous world. End quote. So, to accomplish the goal of making a small world feel larger, the developers worked to create a world with a discernible framework and limits. They'd then build beyond that. Or in the case of the aforementioned budget issues with the original Nier, they created a world and then created a smaller world within it. Quote, in Nier, by showing players ending A, you give them the false impression that the game is over, or that the world is smaller. But then by showing them ending B, I was hoping to show them that the world is larger than they could have imagined. End quote. Now, I would like to clarify that I am by no means claiming a small world is always objectively better than large open worlds. There are pros and cons to each, and very specific reasons why one would work for a game and the other wouldn't. Ocarina and Nier, to my knowledge, are the only games that use their worlds in the way that they do. They inflict a certain charm on the players by having them revisit areas multiple times, so that eventually the entire world becomes familiar, and traversing it simply becomes muscle memory. And once the player thinks they've seen everything, the game subverts that idea and expands the world. The reason that Ocarina or Nier would feel smaller after the first playthrough is because the player already knows the full extent of the world. As Yoko said, it was the most important thing he felt when playing Mario is the moment he thought he couldn't do something, but in fact could. It's a carefully executed surprise that is not possible in a typical game world. There are of course many other methods that games with small worlds use to make them feel larger, but in the case of Ocarina and Nier, they provide a very special first-time experience. The kind of experience you heavily recommend to a friend while telling them to go in completely blind. The kind of experience you wish you could have for the first time again. Thanks for watching.